Most say, I want to be a ball player. I want to be a musician. I want to be a dancer. Neuroscientist.
Mhm.
When did you gain the love to partake in that area of expertise?
When I was a kid, I was always interested in human behavior. During the time in the 80s where crack cocaine was actually pretty rampant and throughout our neighborhoods, right? And so for me, I was always interested in that behavior. And I thought to myself, people would say, because we grew up in the church, that these drug addictions and stuff that we saw were probably because people lacked discipline or weren't church people, or for whatever reason, it was on them. But when I'm looking at it at that time, I remember thinking it has to be something greater than that, because this drug has people doing things that's counter to their family stability and viability, like robbing and stealing from their kids and moms and this, that, and the other. So you go to church, think about it, do all this stuff, but that's a part of it, but everybody is not like that. And I think we need to make sure that we give people the grace and the space to heal mentally, because there are still biological processes that are happening in the brain that will ultimately or can cause you to have some problems. So if you're depressed, the thing that caused you to become depressed may be an issue. Yes, that's certainly a psychological part. But in that process, that depression has damaged your brain in a way. There's a difference between having something bad happen to us and we're temporarily depressed over something. That's a valence that we should have. That's part of it.
Yes.
But when it's prolonged and sustained, it might represent that there's more of a breakdown in the brain. And that's when I found out that, hey, man, I can actually get a degree in something to help me understand something that had been plaguing me since junior high school. And that is how to understand what's the neurochemistry behind what's happening when you take a drug that might lead to addiction. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out here. Are we plugged into the matrix or not? Everything that we do is related to each other, no matter whether it's spirituality, all of it is so related. And the brain is really at the nexus of all of that, right? Every night, if you have a dream, you're pretty much hallucinating, aren't you? So it's sensation and perception, but in the absence of an external stimuli. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know everything, but also you realize, oh my goodness, it's amazing that things don't go more wrong than they do. Because in order for us to have this conversation, there's an infinite amount of things that has to go right every split second for us to even form the words to come out of our mouth. And this is happening at the speed of light at every instant that you're living.
If you ain't got a book, you need a book. If you ain't got a book, you need a Hey, what's going on, friends and family? Welcome to another episode of Talks with Ken. I am your host, Kendrick. This is the place where motivation lives, inspiration thrives, and personal growth resides. Yes, yes. It is a lovely day in the Rowland household. It's a lovely day to be alive. It's a lovely day to get it right. And as you guys know, I always try to inspire you guys to live out your life on purpose, in purpose. And but before I get into all that, I want to make sure we get some business out of the way. If you have not subscribed to your boy, go ahead and click that subscribe link right now. Go ahead. We got to be the change before we can see the change. All right. Go ahead and click that link. I know you can do it. Let's make our communities better. All right. So I promise you guys that we were gonna bring bigger and better guests onto the show every single week. And I didn't fall short on today's guest. I'm gonna give them a little build up on this because as you guys know, those who've been following me along for the last year or two, know that I'm a big advocate for personal development and the power of the mind. And what better way than to talk and discuss about the mind than to bring a neuroscientist onto the show? Without further ado, let me introduce my guest for today, Dr. Onarae Rice. How you doing, Onarae?
Man, I'm doing great. How about you?
Man, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Better now that you on the show. I was definitely excited. And for my viewers, I know you guys probably like, man, you just had a Rice on the show. Yes, this is the other half. I can't always say the better half, but I did have his lovely wife, Tyranny Rice, on the show not too long ago, talking about early childhood development and education. And I just not told him off camera, this is definitely a power couple, one that loves the community, and they're living on purpose, in purpose. So, let me get my first question. Honoré, Who
Yeah.
is Dr. Onarae Rice?
Man, I tell you, it's a loaded question, man. I am developing and I'm changing by the day. But I'll tell you, when I think about myself, I really like to be seen as a husband, a father, someone who really cares about their family and will do anything to try to ensure that the family is taken care of. I am a neuroscientist, so that's what I do, and I am passionate about that. And so I'm a professor at Furman University and I chair the neuroscience department there. And so, in addition to actually conducting neuroscience research, I try to inspire the future minds as well as with my students. So, and then of course, I'm a work in progress. Our parents and grandparents used to say, God ain't through with me yet. And so, God is still
Yes,
working with me. And I like to consider myself a spiritual person who really likes to order the steps.
man. Onarae. I already feel it already, man. And then, I'm gonna go down this little laundry list of who you are as far as your profession. You correct me if I'm wrong. So you have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Wofford College, correct?
Yes.
And you also intern at Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York?
That's correct. Out on Long Island, New York. Yep.
Man, get up out of here, country boy going to the city. Okay, I
To
ain't
the
mad, I
city.
ain't
To
mad
the
at.
city.
And you also have a master's in biopsychology at Stony Brook University,
Correct.
and
Yes,
as
sir.
well as receiving your PhD from Stony Brook University. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct.
Ladies
Yes,
and gentlemen,
sir.
do you
Yes,
feel like
sir.
you done enough, man?
Man, I tell you, I've done some stuff, but it's still a lot left to do. But I'm telling you, it was a fun process. But yes, we've done a lot, and we're continuing to try to move forward and shed some light on some new areas in the research field. But man, it's been a great journey. Great journey.
Well, we're gonna get into it. We're gonna dive into it. So let's go down memory lane before we get into the specifics of what you do at Furman
Sure.
University.
Uh-huh.
When a kid is in their adolescent, most say, "I want to be a ball player. I want to be a musician. I want to be a dancer." Neuroscientist.
Hmm.
When did you gain the love, or where did you gain the love to partake in that area of expertise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I was always interested in human behavior. And particularly
Mm,
growing up in Spartanburg, where I'm from, during the time in the 80s where crack cocaine was actually pretty ran rampant and throughout our neighborhoods, right? And so for me, I was always interested in that behavior. And I thought to myself, people would say, because we grew up in the church, that these drug addictions and stuff that we saw were probably because people lacked discipline or couldn't weren't church people, or for whatever reason it was on them. They did not have the mental fortitude to say no. But when I'm looking at it at that time, I remember thinking it has to be something greater than that, because this drug has people doing things that's counter to their family stability and viability, like robbing and stealing from their kids and moms and this, that, and the other. So that stayed in the back of my mind. And so I knew I was interested in behavior. But when I went to Wofford College, that's when I started to get some formal structure in terms of understanding how you might begin to understand behavior, because now I'm in a curriculum, which is why I majored in psychology. But at that time, there was no real, they didn't call my field neuroscience. So, in a way, to kind of answer your question, I kind of Forrest Gumped my way into this neuroscience profession, but it was all predicated on me still understanding that I wanted to know more about human behavior, and particularly how drugs impacted and changed the human behavior. And so when I was at Wofford, that's when I studied, that's when I found out that I really liked science, because I worked with a professor on a project that I really didn't care too much about, but I enjoyed
mm,
the process of the scientific
yeah.
method, testing it out, doing those sorts of things. And then from there, man, some things kind of changed. And that's when I went to New York and I did an internship. And that's when I found out that, hey, man, I can actually get a degree in something to help me understand something that had been plaguing me since junior high school. And that is, how do I understand what's the neurochemistry behind what's happening when you take a drug that might lead to addiction?
Wow, Honore. Wow, that's I always tell individuals to find their why and their purpose, and you seem to have found that at a younger age, going through your maturation process, coming out of high school into college. How did you stay steadfast and focused, keeping that at your prefrontal cortex or
Yeah.
your lobe when you're in
Yeah.
high school? How did you fight all of the nuances of,
Yeah.
wanting to be just a kid and how did you go about that?
Man, I tell you, that was a challenge. My wife and I talk about that all the time. And one of my high school buddies, we talk about that too, because where I grew up in the city, it was easy to become distracted. At that time, it wasn't cool to be the kid in the AP classes carrying a violin at home in the hood and all of that stuff, right?
Right,
One
correct.
of the things, I was pretty good. I wrestled, so I was pretty good. I was pretty athletic, and I think that gave me a little bit of some street cred, so I
Balance.
wasn't, I was a little balanced. And so that was good. But I knew that I did not want to stay where I was. So in other words, I knew I did not want to continue to live the rest of my life in public housing in Spartanburg. And I knew, and so I was motivated to, to do something. And my grandmother and parents, mom would say, "Hey, the best way to get out of your current situation is through education." And at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I didn't want to disqualify myself by doing something that would keep me off the path of education. And then eventually, my hope was that I would then see clearly which path I needed to take as long as I continued to seek an education.
Wow. Yeah, I know just from being a father and
Oh,
well, just from being a human being, but now being a father trying to steer my kids in a certain way, that was, I guess that was really powerful on your end, man. I mean, I can't even say how big that was. Being able to have an idea, seeing a course for your life, being steadfast and being strong with your peers to be able to see it through. And then your ongoing studying, at this age that you are now. Bro, yeah, we about to get into this, man.
yeah.
But did you see any other like scientists that you looked up to in your adolescence, or is it just like all self grown in you? Like you just started to question.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I did not see any other scientists actually, and I just didn't know. One of the things is like I said, a lot of the stuff is just in your head, and you don't know how to process it yet, right? You don't know, but you're thinking about it, and it's there, but you don't necessarily know what the end's going to be. And one of the things that did help me was that even though I lived where I did live, we were fortunate to have friends and other people who were, I mean, they were brilliant too, and they wanted things. And so my core group of friends that I hung out with, some of them were some knuckleheads, but you got to keep a knucklehead around every once in a while when you're coming
Yeah,
up. But
yeah, yeah,
also some
yeah,
of the
yeah, yeah.
hey, but they were also smart. So one of the things that sometimes people didn't equate was the if you are a knucklehead, you don't have any intellect or not smart or not curious, and that's not the case. And so I'm saying all that to say that we and my friends and I would have conversations. We would push each other, and so that was one of the things that kept me going because I didn't see a scientist. I didn't see any. Now I
Yeah.
took an AP chemistry class, AP psychology class, those things in high school, and so I kind of knew roughly about it, but I didn't have someone to emulate at that particular point. And so it wasn't until actually literally doing that internship that I fully understood what being a scientist was because I didn't know, but I did know I was curious and that I just wanted answers for things, and so then again, that's when I started to learn the scientific process and begin to seek it.
Since I'm talking to a neuroscientist, I want to follow it up with this question because I too had this I guess this yearning, burning feeling. It's like I was more intrigued in certain stuff that other people weren't. And I too came from impoverished type of background. And I tell a lot of youth now when I'm talking or when I'm speaking to them, or it can be formal or informal, and they want to say, "How did you get out the hood?" Or "How did you do?" And I actually had to go back to just think myself, what gave me that feeling? How could I see beyond my situation, my current situation? And I always tell people now I had to learn that there was all up here, as I grew up. But it was in my adolescence, like you just had mentioned, how do you put these things together to formulate that correct processes to be able to get you out of that point? Because I too went through that same thing. I was like, well, Well, I know. Actually, I do kind of know. My mom came home. She worked a little side story. My mom came home and from working multiple jobs, and she said, and it was a rough day for me. Rough day at school. Thunderstorm had knocked the power out and all that kind of stuff. And she came home and said, "Days won't always be like this. Days won't always be like this." And I actually wrote a blog about that some time ago when I was doing my blogging, and I said the spirit of optimism was born in me at that day.
Yeah.
And I always think that things aren't as bad as they seem, and I think that things can always get better, not worse, but better
Hmm.
from that day, and I was in 7th grade. And then so that kinda sparked like, "Man, you had one of the toughest upbringings, but you are always smiling, you're always happy." And I started to look into it. I was questioning.
Man, listen, my grandmother was like that. So although I did not have a scientist to look up to, my grandmother, though, in terms of the way she lived her life, my brother, when I tell you, is one of the most beautiful spirits, beautiful human beings you want to meet. I mean, I'm telling you, I would hear her say certain things, and I knew it was tough for her. We didn't have a whole lot, but I'll tell you, she, she would even, she would give you her last, and she would go in the kitchen when it wasn't much food there, but she would come out with a full meal and it was good. And she shared it. And I'll never forget, I'm a member of a fraternity, but she would always, since I was at Wofford and I was close to home, she would call them my fat boys. She didn't mean frat. She meant frat boys. Yeah, she said, tell your fat boys to come on over on Sunday and get something to eat. And so we would come over. But the point is I realized that I wanted to really do something, man, when I heard her talking about me to somebody else. When I saw her and how proud she was of me as she was explaining to somebody else. And now I got a chance to see myself through my grandmother's eyes. And that ultimately, I was like, man, if this is what she sees, I'm not letting her down for that. Cause I want to be
Man.
what she sees. And I don't yet see it, but I want to be what she sees.
Honore. I think that's beautiful, man, and I think that parallels a lot of similarities. What you're saying is exactly the same thing. That stories I share with my boys is, and I tell them in those tough times, it wasn't just me. I know they say live for yourself, be who you're going to be, but I never wanted to let my elders, my grandparents, my grandpa, my mom, I never wanted to let them down. They saw
No,
something in me that I couldn't quite see, but they even spoke of me at a high level in my adolescence, and I conceded that point. So, yeah, I definitely share that sentiment.
right, right.
Let's get more into like the aspect of your profession. For my viewer, break down what is psychology. I know, but let's break down what is psychology.
Well, psychology and biology and chemistry all together forms neuroscience. So psychology is a part of being a neuroscience. So all of those are together, right? So as a neuroscientist, what separates the thing is that because you are interested, like, a lot of times as a psychologist, because that was my undergraduate degree, I was interested in trying to understand the behavior, right? The reason I became a neuroscientist was because now I'm trying to understand the neurobiological underpinnings of the behavior. So, to kind of compare the two, psychologists oftentimes may be trained to counsel you, to be, to help you to get back to work, to do what you need to do, to be marriage counselors or spiritual counselors. And that's great. Though, was not so much interested in that as I'm interested in, well, what's going on in your brain to cause this, right?
Right.
So, like, if you have a person who is, let's just say, addicted to drugs, a psychologist or may help you to talk about the problems, the underlying issues. Me, I want to know what brain regions are actually being activated when you take the drug and seeing how. So that's what I want to know. I want to get under the hood and actually fix or understand what's running the machine. And so that's what a neuroscientist is. And so that's why I chose then to go from psychology to behavioral neuroscience and biological psychology from my perspective. And so that's kind of what that is. Now you can take any type of question, right? So for me, it's drug addiction. It could be autism. It could be depression. It could be whatever. Anything that's in the head, you're a neuroscientist if you're asking questions about the brain and how that brain might ultimately impact or shape a behavior. And so that's what neuroscientists do. And it's a huge field, and there's so many different techniques that can be used in order to answer those questions.
See, I was gonna piggyback on this later on in the episode, but I'm gonna talk about it now because you just now mentioned something that I gotta get to. I look at what you just now said as like a superpower. I
Mm,
look at being able to dissect and understand the brain as a superpower, and I'm all about the holistic approach instead of being medicated on anything. And because just this is just me, I don't feel that medicines fix things automatically. I really feel like, yeah, I'm gonna exaggerate this. When I've read before, like people can think themselves into a coma. People can think themselves thinking they're pregnant, or their body can be tricked to feel like they're pregnant, but they're not pregnant. That's how strong the brain is.
oh man.
And so, just with what you said, as far as how those neural transmitters and all that kind of stuff goes through your body and mind, do you think neuroscience is like when you get into the core? Do you feel like that has you looking at life like in slow motion because you know how the brain works?
Yeah. It's slow motion, but it's also terrifying because it's the more you know, the more you realize you don't know
Mm,
everything. But it also you realize, oh my goodness, it's amazing that things don't go more wrong than they do, because for in order for us to have this conversation, there's an infinite amount of things that has to go right every split second for us to even form the words to come out of our mouth, right? So the brain is controlling everything, your thought processes. It's controlling your ability to blink your eyes, to breathe, to do all of that, and this is happening at the speed of light at every instant that you're living. And so it could just take one power outage, to make an analogy, to your house, and then now all the lights are out until, and then what now brings it back online. And so uh, and so again, a whole lot of things have to go right for us to do the most minuscule thing. So it can be terrifying when you know a lot already, right? You're like, oh my gosh. And so, but it also, again, I go back to being curious. It's like, but then you realize, man, everything that we do is related to each other, no matter whether it's spirituality, whether all of it is so related. And the brain is really at the nexus of all of that, right? Being able to understand those things. So, like you mentioned, thinking yourself into a coma or thinking that you're pregnant, the brain is so powerful. Every night, if you have a dream, you're pretty much hallucinating, aren't you? Because a hallucination is exactly that, right? It's experiencing some sort of sensual perception. So it's sensation and perception, but in the absence of an external stimuli. And
yeah.
you still see it as if it's real. And then you get up and you're sweating and you're experiencing it, right? And that's how powerful the mind is. So, yeah,
Is that what entrepreneurs or high achievers tap into? Because you gotta kinda trick the brain to think that that's a current reality in order to obtain it. Is that the right thinking on that?
I think so. I think when they talk about positive thought and all of that, you have to think it and then believe it, because when you do think it, then it's just training a network of neurons to then be convinced that this is what's possible. And we can do phenomenal things if we are stressed enough or if we're motivated enough. I mean, you've heard women lifting up cars to
Yes.
save their kids and do that. So we don't know the limits of what we're capable of doing. And so we just continue to look at that and continue to study it, and just to see what we're actually capable of doing.
You mentioned positivity and negativity. If we really focus on a certain thing, whether it's positive emotion, negative emotion, can we really, in a sense, turn ourselves into a magnet or a deflector based off of what we're seeing and we're telling our story over and over again?
Well, you can, and oftentimes, and we can all be sort of transparent in our lives. We all go through some things, right? It's been tough, and so the more you perseverate over the negative thing, the more you're listening to that in an echo chamber, and you have physiological responses to that. It's no mystery that once you are depressed or in a constant rumination of something negative, then what are we doing? We're losing weight. We stop eating. We stop having desire for other things that we want to do. And all of that is that mental process. But we also know that if you start exercising, if you get out, start get blood flow to yourself and start to now distract yourself from actually being so negatively, ruminating over the negativity, then you may also see the opposite things happen, right? And so So just thinking about things is a really big thing. Now, I will say just thinking about things is not always the answer, just the only answer. It is an answer and it is an explanation, but I don't want to overlook the people who really do struggle with something that may be a chemical imbalance or something that's not actually happening in their brain. So it's not as easily explained away as just thinking something away or something like that.
Oh, and look, talk to me because that was my follow up question. Because I was just saying, why are we seeing this mass mental health quote unquote crises that we're seeing? Would you still say, like, you go to a physical therapist for a broken bone or after a surgery, even if there is a chemical imbalance? Would you still say that you have to do brain work in order to aid the medication in which you may need?
Well, yeah, yeah. That so there's it's all related, right? It's all interrelated, all of those things. But one of the things, like you said, it's not just thinking one thing. But you brought up a good analogy, and that is like if you have broke your bone or something, right? You can easily see a broken bone. If someone walks in with a cast on, you can see externally that something's wrong with their leg. They need it to be fixed, and they're doing whatever they need to do, right? And so they'll get it fixed, and that takes time. But we don't see when a neural network is faulty, right? And so because you don't see a neural network that's faulty and you don't see a cast on that neural network, to use the analogy, is oftentimes out of our sight. So we don't think about it. We're thinking, well, why don't you just get better? But the
Okay.
brain is actually just as, if not more important than that broken bone. But we, and I say this as a black male, like we grew up as like, look, you go to church, think about it, do all this stuff. But that's a part of it. But everybody is not like that. And I think we need to make sure that we give people the grace and the space to heal mentally because there are still biological processes that are happening in the brain that will ultimately or can cause you to have some problems, right? So if you're depressed, yeah, the thing that caused you to become depressed may be an issue. Yes, that's certainly a psychological part. But in that process, that depression has damaged your brain in a way. And now that brain still needs to heal so that you can think the proper way. So it's not. So we just have to be careful, right? It's a difference between having something bad happen to us and we're temporarily depressed over something.
Oh,
That's a valence that we should have. That's part of it. But
yes.
when it's prolonged and sustained, it might represent that there's more of a breakdown in the brain, and it may be more of the equivalent of a broken bone, and I'd say a broken neural network. And pharmacology sometimes help to bring that back.
Okay. Okay. See, so yeah, in that physical therapy of the brain, is that where the psychologist or the psychiatrist comes in to be able to help that individual that may have that imbalance? Or
Mhm.
can that be a short term imbalance or the long term type of deal that you have to talk to someone to kind of get you out of those loops? Am I saying
Yeah.
that right?
You're right, and so one of the ways in which I talk to my students is like in neuroscience, they wanted something to be always or never, right? And it's never like that, or they just want it to be either or. It's a lot of gray, and it's a lot of everything being intertwined together. So I'll say it to you like this: my part of my research is on post traumatic stress disorder and the comorbidity with alcoholism. So people who become depressed because of post traumatic stress disorder will oftentimes self medicate with alcohol and other drugs to kind of help them get through the negativity that they've experienced or the trauma that they've experienced. And so if that's the case, then we think about the pharmacology of it. And so that is, yeah, in order to get that person, if you're depressed, let's just say depression right now to keep it simple. In order to get you back right, sometimes you need a medicine to help level you out so that you can begin the positive thinking that you're talking about.
Mm,
So aid. It's not a fixer, but it's an aid. It's the thing that the psychologist has to help you to be able to talk the thing through. But you have to have the brain being able to produce the amount of neurotransmitters and being intact temporarily so that you can have that positive conversation with your counselor and continue to work on it. And eventually the goal is to come off the medication because now you have rewired the brain and your thinking so that you can now come out of your depression. But
mm.
it's oftentimes not either or, it's both.
Oh man, you said a lot. Man, I'm gonna be respectful for your time because I could talk forever about this. No, I really can't because you said a mouthful. And I was reading a book by Dr. Amen, I believe is his name. And he says, I think the book name is You Happier. And he prefaced in his book was that we regular doctors sometimes can misdiagnose because they can't see something, like what you just mentioned. They can't see it. And so they try to, practice. This is what's probably wrong. This is what's probably wrong. But he has individuals come down to one of his clinics. I think one of his closest clinics is like in Georgia area or Atlanta area.
Hmm.
And he said that his mission by his works and his studies was trying to get more I guess medical facilities in general to treat the brain, to
Yes.
treat the brain. He was like, yeah, they can have Band-Aids at something that needs stitches, or
You're
they
right.
want to have, something that they can basically, he was just talking about the plans to get someone back on the road to recovery
Yes.
or given a pill, and it's like, "Well, just take this," and the medical system isn't quite set up to have that person take those proper steps, as just you said, to get to that point of being whole or whole-ish
Yeah.
again. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I do agree with that sentiment, and because we're so different. That's why now you also are seeing where some doctors are using some genetic testing to see whether or not you are more prone to respond positively to certain drugs, like some SSRIs or some SNRI or whatever drugs that might help you with depression and or anxiety. Because even though feel like we understand that mechanism in the brain in terms of what substructures in the brain communicate with each other to keep us happy or are active when we're anxious, we still respond differently to the drug. So just because you take the drug that's supposed to do that, your body will respond completely different to it. I can give one person the same dose as it's no different than drinking. Let's just say we all had a drink before. We've all known the one person that can take
A
one
lot.
drink, they done, and then the other one, it take 10 drinks and for them to get drunk, right? So your body is so different at metabolizing these drugs and things. So that's why the sort of genetic, honing in on your specific genetic makeup to see how you might respond to a particular drug is kind of sounds like what this doctor's talking about too. And that'll kind of help you to really have a designer treatment for some person as opposed to a whole, you just give everybody the same thing.
That is exactly that was the nature of his book, getting to know
Yeah.
your type for the plan and that you hit it dead on the head. I didn't know that until I read that book, and I know it now because of talking to you. I'm gonna go talk what you said earlier, like in the Black community. We can say, "Oh, that person just a little crazy. He'll be all right," or "That's just that person." Da, 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 not knowing it is some type of chemical imbalance that we're just trying to sweep under the rug,
Hmm.
or personal trauma that has not healed, but they have not taken those proper steps to get back to that feeling whole point. But you hit that dead on the head. I want to talk. We're gonna jump back on this a little bit, but I want to talk more about your work at Furman.
Hmm.
You mentioned, I know you got a couple of projects going on. You know,
Hmm.
Could
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
talk about a couple, specifically one with how drugs or alcohol introduced to youth have a part in their development? I think that was one of them, or am I butchering it?
I was looking at toluene huffing and how people might
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
huff, especially at juveniles, because when you are in juvenile, as a juvenile, your brain's not fully developed. And so whenever you take drugs, and sometimes people are huffing glue, they're even sniffing alcohol. I don't know if in COVID, you may have remembered people used the hand sanitizer and they had to watch
Correct.
the hand sanitizer because kids were putting so much on their hands and huffing it to get the ethanol out of the hand sanitizer and affecting their brain and cognition. And so I've been interested in adolescent exposure to drugs and how it may ultimately change. But most recently, I've been focusing primarily on that what I mentioned to earlier, and that was the brain's ability to develop PTSD, what's happening there, and then understanding that comorbidity between PTSD and as well as um, alcoholism, the two that are together. And so I mean, that's an interesting topic because I was only interested in alcoholism at one point, but then one day I was getting my car serviced by the 10-minute oil change guy that knows me because I come in so regularly. And we were talking about my research. And he said, "Hey doc, so how's the alcohol research going?" And I explained to him that we had actually shown that if we block the brain's dopamine D3, I'm using jargon now,
D3.
but
No, no, go ahead.
but if you block the brain's dopamine D3 receptor, that we can actually decrease binge drinking, which is the number one correlation or predictor of alcoholism. And so he was like, "Oh man, that's great." And so the guy who was working up underneath my car, he sticks his head out and he tells me, he said, "Man, you do alcohol research." He said, "Well, if you mind me sharing this with you," he said, I'm an alcoholic." He said, "Because I actually am working here because I can't work my other job, because he actually developed PTSD and started drinking." And he said, "I developed PTSD because he was an EMS worker, EMT, and he arrived on the scene of a car accident where it was a fatal accident, and it was a 4-year-old girl who was dismembered. And so he developed post-traumatic stress by just seeing that sight." And he said, "As I'm speaking to you right now, and I'm changing the oils in your car, the smell of this triggers me from what and brings back to me the experience that he experienced when he arrived to the scene." At that moment, I started thinking, well, I'm targeting the brain's dopamine D3 receptors in an area that's responsible for reward. But I also know that those same receptors are located in an area of the brain that we call the amygdala, and that amygdala is responsible for our emotional processing and emotional memory, as well as
Man,
specifically olfactory of memory. So if you've ever been in a situation where you smelled something and it brought back an emotion, like, "Oh, that
okay.
smells like my grandmama's house,"
Yep.
and you like, "Oh
Yep.
man, that's great." Well, the amygdala and all of that are related to that. So that's what gave me the idea that maybe then also blocking the brain's dopamine D3 receptor might be able to treat PTSD. And me and my students published the first paper in the world to show that if we blocked the brain's dopamine D3 receptor, we can decrease the expression of post-traumatic stress disorder in an animal model for PTSD.
What?
So
So
that's
now,
what we've been.
when you say D3 receptor, what exactly is the D3 receptor? Because you mentioned blocking that. Could you
Yeah,
elaborate
that's
on?
great. So that's good, and I'll elaborate on that. So we have chemicals in our brain. Everybody says, "Oh, dopamine, that's the chemical," but the chemical has to bind to something. So if we think about it in a sports analogy, if let's just say football, the football itself is equivalent to the neurotransmitter dopamine. But the football, if Tom Brady throws it, somebody has to catch it, and that's the receptor. Third receptor could be, well, did the tight end catch it? Did the wide receiver catch it? Did the running back catch it? And whoever caught it, then they may have different abilities on their own to reach their goal. If you give it to a tight end, they're not going to be as fast as your wide out or whatever. So all of those things are kind of how our neurotransmitters bind to different receptors in the brain to then have different behavioral outcomes. So if I block that, so in my we're thinking, well, instead of that receiver receiving the pass and going to create PTSD, what
Yeah.
if I put a DB in there to block it
Block
so that never gets to the receiver? And then that means that receiver never carries the emotional baggage to then become PTSD later in the brain. So that's what we mean by blocking and antagonizing it.
Honorary, I don't want to belittle what you said, man, but I would think this takes eons, years of studying to be able to have the thought. I'm gonna ask you, how did you come up with that notion or idea? How did it happen, man?
Yeah, and it's because you in the science field, right? We publish papers for the good of the community. So we publish it so that somebody else might read it and say, "Oh, you know what? I'm looking at this. This particular lab has done this. Let me see how that might relate to my work." And so that means you have to be on top of the literature, reading and understanding all of that. And so when that gentleman told me about what he was struggling with, I then knew, or at least thought, because I'd read several papers that showed where the D3 receptors were located in the brain. And I know the brain from a neuroanatomical standpoint. And so it just made sense to me that if we then target that receptor in some sort of way, maybe we might have an outcome. We just needed to have a chemical or some way to block that. And we needed to have a what we call a behavioral assay to test it in our animals, right? Because animals don't just come up to you and tell you, hey, doc, I think I got PTSD or whatever. You have to
Correct.
be able to come up with a paradigm to test it and then to ultimately to have an intervention and test it. So that's what we did. And so it just takes a lot of reading, takes a lot of, calling up different neuroscientists, psychologists, chemists, or whatever, and then putting it all together.
Wow. So you're literally you're a student of life. I go by that slogan, but you're a
Yeah.
student of life because
Oh yeah.
literally you are outside of the lab, but you are in the real world using your know-how, using the environment from this gentleman,
Yes.
the conversation that was had, and you not being afraid to talk about your work or not being afraid of someone talking or asking you a question. I think all that is really, really huge about the interconnectedness of us as human beings.
Yes. Yes.
And I always like to point that out because I think a lot of what I've learned was from that interconnectedness, and that aided your work.
Yeah. I'm telling you, it's amazing. And the reason I tell that story is so that you can actually to hear what you say about that, right? To basically that you don't have to just be on your job
Yeah.
to have an influence or to be influenced by. You have to always be curious, always be listening and thinking, and all of this stuff is connected, right? And that's how he just spawned a new research area for me just by simply talking to him. So yeah, so that's you just got to be open and to hearing what's going on around you, and then when those moments come, you have the know-how, and
Yeah.
you just make the moves to try to connect the dots.
And so I'm assuming you're using like a rat or a pig or something like that to
Yeah,
test on?
yeah. We use rats and mice primarily in there, and that's about in the field of neuroscience and mostly in science and all. We all use animals in our research. And I always put this disclaimer out there that anybody doing any animal research at any institution and get government funding has to actually get approval from something that's called the Institutional Animal Use and Care Committee, which is a committee, we call it the IACUC. And that committee is comprised of scientists, veteran vets, and philosophers, non-scientists, and they all look at a protocol that you submit to them so that you can get validation. Can I actually do this research? And they'll say, yeah, no, you can't do it. Or if you do it, you have to change this or whatever. The reason for that is to make sure that ethically you're doing what you can do, that you're not doing more than necessary to the animals to minimize stress, distress, pain, and anything to the animals that you're working.
Did not know that. So it's like the DNR of medical research, like the
Yeah,
DNR
yeah, yeah.
controlling how
Yeah,
many deer we can harvest each year. Why
yeah, you can't just do anything you want to. You have to
there's
spell it out down to the letter of what you plan to do, how long you plan to do it, and if they don't like it, you don't get a chance to
so
do it, and you
that could
fund
be
it.
a big hurdle in your research. If you got so much like data that's for your point, but that somehow can't be conveyed to the board or who you have to get that
Mhm.
approval from, they can slow your research.
Yeah. In fact, you won't get the data because you have to get the approval first before you can even do the research. So yeah, I can't do anything until I first present and say, hey, this is my idea. So when I got that idea, I developed it all and thought about it, and then I had to write it up and submit it to this committee. And they said, yeah, and they said, well, you don't need to do. I'm just making this up.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
don't need to do 10 animals. Maybe just do five. And you're like, I might not be able to do. Then it's a negotiation. You're like, five won't give me enough for statistical significance. I need to do this, So, but I like it because it holds us all accountable,
I
and
like
that's one
that.
of the things that we have to do because in pursuit of the right thing, good people do bad things, not necessarily because they want to, but because if you are, you can think of it. A scientist might find like, man, I'm just now cured PTSD. That's a lot of money in it for me. All I need to do is get a drug, so I'm willing to do whatever I can. I'll test whatever. And then because of that motivation, I may do anything, right? But everybody needs accountability so that you don't you succumb to your own hubris and try to do what you need to do.
Man, look, you opening up a whole nother world for me, man. Because I love this stuff, man. But this is your world, and with that, how with you being a neuroscientist, with you conducting your own experiment, with you teaching this to your students, how do you keep it in a row and balance all of those entities while being a husband and a father? How do you keep it in a row?
Man, it is. I'll be honest. It is not easy because I enjoy my students. I love my students. They keep me feeling young, even
Yeah,
though I'm not. Except and so because every 4 years
they cycle out.
cycle, they cycle out, and they are curious. They're really good. All of the work that I talked about, we could not have done it without students. So from that aspect, I love that. I love the teaching. Teaching is completely is related to the research, but it's different, right? So when you're teaching something, you might have a canned lab. You already know how it's going to go, and you teaching them some techniques or whatever. But in the real world of research, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't always have the answers, right? You may have the right questions, but you don't have the right answers. And so helping my students reconcile those two things is a challenge because as I mentioned earlier, students want to know it's one plus one is always two. Well, in neuroscience, one plus one
Yeah,
might be three sometimes.
correct.
Sometimes
Right.
it may be something else. And that's a hard thing for young students to reconcile. So that requires some time. But as a husband and as a father, I've made some sacrifices actually for my career in favor of my family.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Talk to
so
them. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, because honestly, if I'm being quite honest, I could probably be a lot further on along in my career had I not made the sacrifices for my family. But I grew up without a father, and I remember when early on in my career, I had a conversation with a more mature scientist, and he said he missed those times because he was in the lab. And he said, now in his age, when he was retiring out, he was like, they don't pay us enough to not take care of our family. And I agree with I subscribe to that 100%.
I
So
love it.
Furman doesn't pay me enough to not be present for
Sure.
my boys, and so it just meant I made that sacrifice. So I'm not as far along, as I could have been with some of my other peers who did make the sacrifice. No knock on them. I'm so glad,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I've been
yeah.
able to do both. So it's been a hard thing. It's a balance, and so they both have been moving forward. Maybe not as quickly in the career or as far in the career, but I'm happy. And so I think from that perspective, I'm still contributing and I'm still very, very happy.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys heard that. If not, go back and replay it. No matter the success, I subscribe to that same thing, Honore. I subscribe to that same thing, and it's rewarding. It's rewarding because I too grew up without a father in the household, and I too had a associate of mine. He was probably 30, 40 years my senior when I
Hmm.
first started at the company I was at, and he was like, "Man, one thing that I wish," because he seen me with my boys, and he said, I didn't do it with my girls. I
Yeah.
didn't do it with my girls, and that's something that I can never get back, and every time I see you come in here happy from your weekend, I feel bad.
Yeah.
And, very successful individual, not
Yeah.
knocking what he did at all,
Right.
like, not knocking what he did, but that was a choice. But now me, younger, hearing that, yeah, yeah, and I can share your same sentiment. I'll probably be further in certain endeavors, but being a father and being a present husband is,
Yes.
very much priceless
Um.
in my life. But no, when I see individuals practice at a high level like you, and then I know we use it, we joke about this all the time, like at work. Oh, I got brain fog today. But
Yeah.
literally, how do you find a moment to turn yours off?
Yeah. Tierney will tell you I've struggled with that sometimes because it's hard. Because I've tried to find ways to. So how a computer might have multiple apps on at the same time,
Yeah,
and
running in the background.
they're running in the background and parallel processing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how I am. So I may be physically with you sometimes, but sometimes I'm parallel processing because I'm trying to make my presence be in multiple places at once. And so I don't do a good job of shutting it off. And I didn't sleep well. I get some sleep, but sometimes my mind's always trying to solve a problem. What's going on? How do I do this or whatever? So I don't do it as well. But now that I'm getting older, I'm learning how to do better at it. But
Yeah,
over the
yeah.
years, I didn't do so well at all of that. But it's like I told you before, I'm a work in progress.
Yeah, but no, I love it, man, because again. some individuals from the outside looking in, I ask that question intentionally because you're operating up here, man. Like you in the stratosphere, and you're still working through your processes on a day to day basis. And it's not like you're a finished product or your life is perfect that you don't have your own things that you have to deal with your research, your studies, your wife, your family, and balancing all those things, and even your own brain when you're trying to turn it off, or maybe getting up in the middle of the night. I got this idea, whatever. And that's what I try to do on this platform. I try to get my listeners and viewers to understand that if you're thinking about trying, or you're afraid to try, even those who are doing, not trying, but
Mhm.
doing,
Yeah,
is still having to do something to get past some type of hurdle, some type of block.
exactly. Man, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's maintenance. One of the things I tell people too is, you know, getting there is one hurdle, but
Mm,
staying there is another. So getting the job is great, but keeping the job is even harder. Getting into school is hard, but staying in school is you gotta and every day it's a different battle, and you just gotta be versatile and you gotta be ready for what's coming at you. You know?
no, you're true. Let's switch gears a little bit. But when is when does the prefrontal cortex fully develop? And I preface this by saying it was a psychiatrist or a something like that. He was like, yeah, with the use of technology and the way it is now, it was probably this age, but now we're saying is this age.
Yeah.
Would you in your community, is that something that's discussed, has been discussed?
Yeah, the prevailing thought is 25, 26, right? People think that that's when it's fully being developed. And to be honest, that's a hard thing to come about, right? Because one of the things that you think about is what is development? Do you mean that it's finished growing? And so when you look at something, just because you see a structure and it stopped growing, you still don't know the function. So it's like looking at somebody who's in the gym and they're all buff, right? But they may not be as strong as dad's strength, right? The dad may have a
Correct.
dad bod, but that joker's strong. So it's the
Correct.
functionality of it that's the tough. So I say 25 or 26, but I really don't think that we really know that. We can say structures stop growing at a particular time, but that's only half the story. I think functionality is also a big aspect of it that we don't really fully know. But we do have fMRIs and other type of ways to look at function and functional connectivity. So, but that's not my field. But I do think about that and just think about the structure, the function that we have to you think about those things together.
Honore, you set a bar, man. My God. Next question. You know, and I got a couple of these I'm gonna ask you before we get to
Okay.
the final Ken talks, okay?
Okay.
How is your understanding of your own brain influence the way you live your day-to-day life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It kind of for me because but I think I alluded to this earlier because you know so much.
Yes.
You're like, man, you try to be so cautious about things and that comes across differently for different people, right? So like if I'm talking to my kids, they think I'm just saying what I want to what I'm saying because I'm the dad and I'm supposed to scare them into doing whatever blah 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 blah. And I'm trying to tell them from a neuroscientist standpoint that this is what we're talking about. So it's hard for them to separate that out. And so that's tough. But then I also try to live my life in a way to show them that I'm taking care of my brain the very best way that I possibly can. And I also show them when I fail. And so it's like, hey, I didn't do what I needed to do this time. And this what could have happened. Thank God it didn't. But hey, I've got another opportunity to rebound and to do whatever. So I gotta let them see me, So that's kind of how I try to deal with it on a day to day. But it does, man, it keeps me vigilant, thinking about all of the possible things that can go wrong, and then you sit there trying to
Great.
ward those things off as much as you can.
Honore, man, I say that I'm laughing because I'm hearing myself and you. And
Yeah,
many, many years I tried to force that square peg into a circle hole. And it was actually my barber. He was actually on the show, Shannon Cleveland. He can probably be my therapist sometime. But I was mentioning something. He said, yeah, but didn't it take you 30 years to understand it?
yeah,
And he paused, right?
yeah,
And I knew what he was talking about, but it was one of those things to where, cause like I journal too. I journal my goals, but I journal, for myself and all that kind of stuff too. But it was one of those things to where I started to understand. I read it somewhere in a book too about it was a self-help book. It's like if you're trying to change a certain situation, you can change it indirectly by changing yourself first. And then those around you, specifically in your home, will see it. And
Hmm.
subconsciously, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, they'll see you doing it. And so I started, man, working out like crazy. I supercharged my reading, and I understood how to communicate more effectively,
Right.
not out of anger
Right.
when they did something. So I had to kind of in a sense, over describe what was happening in that certain situation. Because, and I firmly believe this, in the community in which I come from, not specifically just in my household, but the community in which I come from, we heard a lot of just do this because I said so. But I understood through my own maturation process that that ain't always the solution. I mean, and then you grow up, something that you thought was probably minuscule in that moment turned into be something so huge and had big lifelong ramifications on that kid that said, my mom or my dad always said this. And, or they could think that they were just brushed over and not really, they just make me do something. And I was telling them how I felt. I try to over communicate now. I mean, which I'm not saying is a bad thing for me at
No,
all.
I get it.
But with me, with you, from hearing what I'm hearing, I look at you as a superpower because you knowing that, knowing everything about the brain, small things that can grow into big things, certain signs, certain stimulus that you can see
Yeah.
your kids having or being around, and you've studied this, that's probably where you're like, well, yeah, I know a little bit too much.
Yeah. Yeah. You know a little bit too much, man. You know a
So,
little bit too much.
with you governing, your kids. So, do you think we put a little too less emphasis on the power of our own minds, like in a day to day?
Yeah. So by that you mean like we don't give ourselves enough credit to think our way out of
Yes.
situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we probably could put more emphasis on that for sure. One of the things I'm learning with the generations, though, is that it's a different generation in terms of how they communicate now and even how they think. And now, when well, I'll just date myself. I won't date you when how old you. But I remember having to go to the library, getting encyclopedias to get
Correct.
information. Now
Correct.
they got all that information right there on their phones and their tablets instantly. And so because of that, things come, as we know, so quickly for them, or they got access for it so quickly. And so I worry that they have not learned sort of the how to regulate all of that stuff
Correct.
themselves and how to think
Correct.
that through some situations. Because, for us, we had to think our parents didn't know, and they were smoking in the house with us. We didn't
Correct.
have seat belts on. We were outside drinking water out the faucet. We were doing all kind of crazy stuff, but that also taught us some survival skills that
Really
I think
did.
now may be missing in some of our generations. So to your point about thinking your way through things or not putting enough power in it, yeah, there may be something to that, and we might need to find a delicate balance of old school versus new school.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's a balance needed for that because we're missing that survival skill.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about the neuroscience field? Like that I may have said, or something that you in your years of studying or being a professor, what are some of the misconceptions about the neuroscience field?
Well, some people say we only use 10% of our brain.
Talk to me.
So, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, well, how do you know? To know it's only 10%, you would have to know what the totality of all that is. And so I think that's really meant to just simply talk about at any particular time how much of your brain is active when you're doing a particular task or something like that. So it's not true that we just use 10% of our brain. It is truly just unknown. But what we're communicating is that we know there's still a lot left to know about the brain, right? So that's one of the things that we are really trying to communicate. The other thing is that neuroscience uses a lot of jargon, but the concepts are not always that difficult. The jargon is what makes it difficult. It's like trying to have a conversation sometimes with someone in a language that you don't know. But neuroscience is all around us. And so just like when, you hear people when we talk about math, you say math to some of our kids, and oh Lord, I don't want it to know anything
Mhm.
about math. That's over my head. But
Mm.
that's not, if you learn how to do the math, if you actually have someone who can communicate that to you, then the fear of that goes away. And so that's part of the same thing with the neuroscience field. It's a vast field, but we need more people, young people, more diverse people in the field, because it is, we talk about all these neurobiological mechanisms. They may not be the same in all, you know, so for genders, for instance, we know the female brain is different than the male brain in some aspects. And so we need to know more about that. Black males versus white males. There's some things that are different about that. And we can't be afraid to examine those sort of things. And so that's part of it. We just need to know that, again, those are not necessarily misconceptions, but it's just an encouragement to others to get involved in the field and not be dissuaded by the term neuroscience in particular, and just know that everything is neuroscience. Everything that you do is
Oh,
related.
I'm gonna tell you, I think half of what you said I held to be true. Like that was one of those misconceptions. That's one
Yeah.
reason I gotta ask him this. What is a daily activity that you think that we should be doing as just regular human beings that enriches or helps our brain in better ways?
I'm telling you, I do think that you've heard this probably a lot of times, just word searches,
Yeah.
just being able to look at, because as we get older, you can imagine just like our muscles begin we lose muscle over a period of time if we're not working out. You've got to do those sorts of things in your brain as well. So just in reading, and when I say reading, reading is really, it doesn't matter what you read, really, right? Just so that you are reading, because when you think about it, when you're reading, you're creating a mental image of what those words are on that.
Correct. Correct.
And so you want to be continually doing that, increasing your vocabulary, doing all of those things to kind of, that's the mental gymnastic. That's what's keeping you going. So those are the things that you want to do, and also communicating with other people and being in touch with other people. Even if you're an introvert or not, there's so much to be said about how your brain responds to external stimuli in other individuals. And if
Mm.
you can, and it's so important, because if you don't, you'll be surprised at how being isolated can have a deleterious effects on the brain on a day-to-day basis. So as we get older, stay connected, keep reading, do word searches, and obviously verbally communicate with people as much as you possibly can. And then lastly, a diet, right? All of the neurotransmitters that are in your brain, the majority of them, they all have a precursor that comes from the food that you eat. And
Mm.
the foods that you eat will help build those neurotransmitters or not build them if you don't have enough of them. So a healthy diet is important.
All right. Man, dude. If you ain't got a book, you need a book. You ain't got a book, you need a book, man. Because you keep saying stuff, and I just want to keep going. But you mentioned something earlier. You talking about the spiritual aspect. I always see when I'm reading neuroscience stuff, they talk about like the quantum physics, the quantum field, or then they even go into like parallel universes. That you mentioned kind of like when you go to sleep, it's like hallucinations or whatever, whatever.
Mhm.
Does all that correlate with each other, or they like totally different avenues?
There are correlations with them. When I think quantum physics and those sort of things, I do think celestial things, right? Like
Mm.
the stars and all of that. And we were looking for Big Bang, where does life come from? Part of my postdoc that I didn't mention is that I worked on after I graduated with my PhD, but still was doing a postdoc, which was right before I came to Furman, is we were looking at that time, President Bush was in office. And so I was still at Brookhaven National Laboratory, and they were starting to look at sending man to Mars. And so if we send man to Mars, then at that time it was a three-year mission there and back. Well, they would be in space, and they would be hit with heavy space ions and other particles. And so the idea would be then, how would that affect the central nervous system in the brain if you have all of these things impacting their brain that could actually cause problems? And on a 3-year mission, you can't stop anywhere to get any help, right? You're out there for 3 years. So part of my job was to do a risk assessment for NASA, because we worked on the NASA grant, to see whether or not we should send astronauts to Mars. And if so, how would that affect their brains? And so we had on Earth, we have at Brookhaven National Laboratory, they have this accelerator that accelerates ions and mimics space radiation. And so when you talk about quantum stuff, we start thinking about the physics of that because that was actually made to simulate the Big Bang, but we used aspect of that to then bombard the brain and central nervous system to see what would happen. So in that so that's just saying that all of these things are related in a sense because when you think about quantum physics, they use that to try to explain, where we come from. If are we the only people or only beings here? And if so, then and then also now with AI, quantum physics, or at least mathematically, what's going on in your brain, because your brain is a neural network, no, probably very similar to a computer. And so then you start to think about then all of the neural network computing that, how that happens. So that's kind of how I think about it when I think about quantum mechanics. But then, there are a lot of conspiracy theories out here. Are we plugged into the matrix or not? We don't
Yeah,
know.
I know.
You
Look, do you guys get into that as far as any kind of debates in the neuroscience field on stuff like that?
Yeah, we do. Because, one of the things is I grew up in the church. And
Yeah.
so when I
Talk to me.
when I grew up, when I went to school there, people, i- they're like, man, there's no such thing as God.
You're
These
you're
two things just bang, and then there we go. And I'm like, okay, I mean that's what you believe, that's fine. That's not up to me to tell you. But I feel like the more I know, the more I'm convinced there has to be. Because I'm like, dude, for all of this stuff to go, I'm not saying evolution didn't take place. I'm not saying any of that stuff didn't take place, but I am saying that I believe that it was orchestrated by a being greater than us that we can't understand. And so,
man, my God. Yeah, that's gonna be a topic for another day.
okay.
Again, yeah, I think look, I'm not even joking when I tell you I haven't made it through half my notes, but we're not gonna go through all of them. But because you just full of information, and it's just like I'm talking to I wish my older self. I gotta ask because I know my mom and everybody else talk about this with me. What role does sleep or being sleep deprived play in our cognitive brain health or abilities?
It's everything, man. I'm going to tell you, sleep deprivation can cause big problems. It can have physical effects. Obviously, your health, your blood pressure, all of that stuff can be a problem. But if you're not sleeping, you mentioned the cognitive fog or that
Yeah,
brain fog.
yeah.
That definitely can happen. Your brain is just it needs rest, right? It needs rest, and there's a lot of studies, sleep studies, that show that and it's important for learning and memory. So as you sleep, we
Mm,
part of the reason we sleep, we're actually learning and consolidating those memories that we had over the previous days or whatever. So it allows your body the opportunity to do that without interference of new information. And so sleep is imperative. And when you don't have it, you feel poorly and you don't think. You're always like the words don't come or you're tired. I mean that is just that sleep is essential to everything that we do. If you don't get good sleep, that's a huge problem for you for sure. There's no doubt.
man, yeah, I'm probably stepping on my own feet on that one. I think that was like 3 years in a row. That was probably getting 5, max 6 and a
Yeah.
quarter hours
Yeah.
of sleep.
Yeah.
And I guess my body kinda got used to it at that point, but it would be days to where I just hit this little mental block, and I would go to sleep, recharge, get an answer in my sleep, and I wake back up, you know.
Right. But now I will tell you, as you get older, you require less sleep.
Oh,
So,
talk
yeah. So when you're younger, you need a lot of sleep. That's why babies sleep, when they come here, sleeping 18 hours a day, because their body is growing. You have human growth hormones. You have all of that stuff that's very active in your sleep cycles. But as you get older, those cycles speed up. And so you need less of that. That's why we saw some of those old people and they're up early. They got their
Yeah,
cup of
like
coffee at
early,
6
early.
o'clock in the morning, like real early,
Yes.
but they require less sleep as you get older. So part of that could be that. So it could be fine just because it's only 6 hours. That doesn't mean that you have to have 8 hours because everybody not have to have hours. In fact, some people can have micro sleeps. There Winston Churchill used to sleep standing up, 5 minutes at a time sometimes, and Bill Clinton could take a nap 15 minutes in meeting and get rejuvenated. The point is, when you know what you need, get
Yeah.
what you need. When you don't, hit that mark, that's when you start to see cognitive decline.
Is do you believe in the law of attraction?
Law of attraction. Yeah. So you mean, I want to make sure I'm operationally define law of attraction. So do we mean like opposites attract or
What you see, think, envision, you will bring that experience into your life.
I see. So it's like manifesting something
Yes, yes,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I do think that yes, if you can you it may not come in I do believe in that. I do believe it may not always come in the form that you have envisioned, but I do mean it opens it up so that you'll get the success that you need. So like for you and I, we have decided, you know what? I want to be a good father, a good husband. I want to live a particular lifestyle or whatever. And if you're thinking that, then that means you're going to be behaving in a way that will allow you to get that. You may not know that this is your wife, or you will be living in Greenville or Spartanburg or in this type of house with this amount of money or whatever. Those are the details. But I do think that you will walk in that direction toward the path of success if that's what you have defined and if that's what you dream and if you've said it. Absolutely believe in that.
Man, I love that, doc. Let's get to these final 3 questions with Ken. I done held your time a little bit, and I do appreciate it. So kind of
No problem. No
so
problem.
are you ready for these? What is the hardest problem you've wrestled with in your research, and how did you overcome it?
Oh man. One of the hardest things that for most scientists is actually getting funding. Because to give you an idea, if you write a grant to NIH, that's where, because these things are expensive. So I have rigs in my lab that cost $30,000, just to run a couple of animals in them, and that's not a full outfit, right? And in fact, I just spent $3,000 on rats, ordering rats, and there were about 40. So all of this costs money. So that is the hardest aspect of it. And so overcoming it. So, and I'll give you this tidbit too. The funding rates at National Institutes of Health hover around 7 to 10%. So
What
that means, yeah, they
on
are
the
not
bottom side?
on the bot right. So that means, and you're competing with people across the United States, right? So it's labs all over. So that says if you write 100 grants, you would need to write 100 grants, and you might get 7 of them reviewed, or whatever. So that's crazy. So overcoming that is just simply writing and having a mentor system in place, having a peer
Yeah.
network together so that you can work together to try to increase the probability that you can get those grants. And so it requires you to be very, very creative to do that because it is tough to get money. That is the hardest thing by far, I think, in being a scientist.
Wow. Wow. Next question. What is your current definition of success?
Man, being able to sleep at night without thinking about, something that you did wrong to somebody
Mhm.
or realizing that there was something that you didn't do that you should have done. Now, obviously, the job is never complete, but but that's being success for me, and just being a good father and a good
Yeah.
husband as possibly can, man. I mean, that's is for me. I don't think about it in a monetary way or anything like that because you don't need. We can live in a one room house, man, and be happy as long as we're healthy, we're together, and and that's all we need, man. So for me, that's what success is. Having people love me, to count on me, and me being able to provide what I can for my
Man,
family.
I love that. That's gonna be a highlight. I love I love that, y'all. And then last question that I have for you. What advice would you give the younger Honore?
Man, talking to you today may make it seem like I had it together,
Yeah.
but I didn't have it together. It was a lot of trial and error. It was,
Yeah.
I made a lot of mistakes. I did a lot of things I should not have done. And God, and that was for me, I look at it as God still protecting me and keeping me from those sort of things. So for me, I would honestly just tell myself that you can do it, that you are okay, that you deserve it, that you are worthy of what it is. 'Cause I had a hard time accepting what I got. I didn't think I deserved it. I walked into places probably not confident. and already counting myself out before I was actually in. And that was all, and I didn't need to do that. So I would have told myself, you belong in these rooms, man, and you just go in there, and you, as long as you hold yourself accountable and you do it and do the work, you belong in those rooms. And that's what I would have done. That's what I would
Wow.
take.
Man, well, Onarae, I think that's good. We gonna end on that one, people. This I know I have taken a lot of notes, and I get the esteemed privilege of being able to edit this and then relive this moment that I had with you, Dr. Rice, and I can't wait to just play this back just to get those little nuggets that I probably missed by just being in awe. And to my viewing audience, I know this was a treat, and we may have to have you and your wife back on the show. I mean,
Absolutely.
no, look, 'cause I definitely I do have a lot. I have a lot more questions, but man, the wealth of knowledge that you was able to provide here to those who probably haven't been in rooms that we've been in, and probably can't even make it to into the doctor's offices like what we're
Yeah.
able to do. Some
Yeah.
little nuggets that you probably did. Even you've said some things that I gotta take more serious with my own self, my own life. We got a lot of parallels, and thank you because the gift that you gave me, I know you give that same gift to my audience, and you didn't have to, but you did.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks coming on. I want to close this out by saying, this is a good example and a wonderful guest to have on who lives in purpose, by purpose, intentionally. And I think we can all learn from this conversation. And this episode definitely did exactly what I had hoped. Before I get off, is there a cause that you are a part of that you want my viewing audience to partake in, support, or know about?
Yeah, there for me, my wife is in early childhood education. And so for me, it is all about supporting families who can't afford early childhood education, because to
Okay.
get to where I am now, it really does start in preschool. You've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to put your kids where they need to be nurtured early. And so my cause is always education, and particularly early education for those who can't really afford it.
Awesome. 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 Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, thank you guys for tuning in. And then to our next episode, this is your boy Kendrick. Peace.